Hey everybody, it's You Had to Ask, the show where I answer your questions. And the first question this week comes from an Entropy fan, and this is a follow-up to an answer I gave to a question in the previous You Had to Ask video where I questioned why someone would want to carry a gun as a means of self-defense, why they would feel that it was necessary, given how improbable it is that you will be attacked by someone and need to use a gun to defend yourself. So here's what an Entropy fan says. Steve, why do you fasten a seatbelt? Are you overwhelmed by fear that you'll crash and die every time you're entering a car? Is that fear of crashing ruling your life? Do you even think about a car crash while fastening a seatbelt? Well, if you've answered these questions, you have answered the question why people feel the need to carry personal firearms. In reality, where nothing is certain but death and taxes, all you can do is make little moves to increase a favorable odd. The thing is, I don't think that's a very good analogy. I don't think that comparing putting on a seatbelt to carrying a firearm is apt. And the reason I say that is putting on a seatbelt is purely a defensive measure. It doesn't place anyone else in danger. There's no risk, or at least there's very, very little risk of accidental death or accidental injury as a result of putting on a seatbelt. It is purely a precaution you take to protect yourself while you are driving a moving vehicle. And studies have shown that it's good for everybody, that it lowers injury, it lowers the risk of being severely hurt in an auto accident. It's just good all around to wear a seatbelt. A gun, on the other hand, even though a gun is often used as a defensive weapon to fend off an attack and is therefore defensive in that way, the gun itself is not a defensive device. The gun is an offensive device. A gun is analogous to a sword, not a shield. And you can certainly use one to defend yourself, but it is not a defensive weapon. It is an offensive weapon. And there are all kinds of things that can go wrong with a gun. And studies have shown that people who are around guns more often, people who own guns, for instance, are more likely to be injured by guns. So it's not the same as saying, well, if you wear a seatbelt, why would you have a problem with someone carrying a gun? Carrying a gun is different than wearing a seatbelt. A seatbelt doesn't increase your risk. A seatbelt decreases your risk, whereas carrying a gun might be useful if you happen to get into a potentially lethal fight with someone else and you need extra protection. But for most people, that is not a likely scenario. And in fact, carrying the gun, having the gun with them, will put them in more danger than they would be without having the gun at all. Next question from Troubleshooter125. I watched The Place earlier this week with your participation and was astonished. I'm not certain I have ever seen such a non-confrontational discussion between atheists and theists before, and it was mightily refreshing. The question about how to bring people like Cy and the Hovens and others of their ilk to a civil discussion is an important one, yet one I'm not certain has a workable answer. How can polemics be removed from the atheist-theist conversation? Can it be done? I'm not sure if removing polemics is the answer, because polemics have their place. It's appropriate and useful to know what the other side's position is and to know what their response to your position is, and sometimes to state that in a very strong sort of adversarial way is healthy. The problem is when people only communicate by swapping polemics, and I think that is the case with a lot of the atheist versus theist arguments, is that people are only communicating by taking turns attacking each other, and there's no attempt to really have a discussion, to come together, to find common ground, to ask honest questions of the other side rather than trying to bait them or maneuver them in for a kill. I think that's the problem. And that sort of behavior goes on from both sides. There are atheists who aren't interested in doing anything but attacking theists and making them look bad. And of course there are theists who are interested in nothing so much as making atheists look foolish and look bad and discrediting and denigrating atheism. So both sides have their faults in that area, and if you are an atheist who wants to have a civil, productive conversation with a theist, so hopefully people watching can see that theists and atheists can come together and can share their beliefs and not back down from their differences, but have a discussion, have a civil, polite, friendly, even discussion. It's not completely up to you. You are reliant on the other side having that same desire. And as I said in my appearance on The Place, I think people like Cy Ten Bruggencate and Eric Hovind aren't interested in having such a conversation. At least I have never seen them behave in such a way that would suggest that they are. I mean, even when Eric Hovind was on The Place, which is a Christian show. I mean, the New Covenant group are certainly not, they're not evangelicals, they're not fundamentalists, but they are Christians. They're not atheists. They're very friendly towards atheists, but most of them are Christians. And even in that environment, which is very friendly and very welcoming, as you saw, very non-confrontational, Eric was still hitting his old talking points and was interested in just making his points and getting himself over, and wasn't really interested in having a conversation, even with fellow Christians of his who just did not share his creationism and his particular philosophy and his particular view of Christianity. He still couldn't get away from his polemic. And there's nothing you can do about that. I mean, if the Christian or the theist in question doesn't want to have that kind of a conversation with you, there's really nothing you can do. The best thing to do is to seek out theists who are willing to have those conversations. Mark Norton, were you surprised not only about Darren Young revealing that he's gay, but the general support he's received from WWE? My guess is that he told them beforehand and it is publicity. Do you think there will be a backlash, if you'll pardon the phrase, from the more conservative fans? Could this be a story angle? Considering that wrestling is about sweaty, muscular guys in short pants throwing each other around, I would be shocked if there weren't at least some gay wrestlers/fans. And Bald to Bits also asked me about the Darren Young coming out and WWE's general handling lately of same-sex issues, which has been very encouraging and very progressive. You know, a lot of times we wrestling fans, especially people like me who have been fans of it for 20 years or so, and even, of course, people a lot older than me who can remember back into the 70s when it was really old school, and even further into the 60s in the era of Bruno Sammartino and Buddy Rogers and Lou Thez. A lot of times we lament this sort of corporatization of wrestling and the corporatization of WWE. We feel like it makes the product a lot blander. It makes it less apt to take chances or to take risks or to present wrestling in maybe a more edgier way than it has been presented in the past. We feel like it encourages them to pander to the teenagers and the children in the audience more than the adults. And there's legitimacy to that. I mean, some of it is just belly aching and bitching from people who just want wrestling to be like it was whenever they got into it, and they just don't like to see it change in any way. But there is some legitimacy to that. But one of the good things about the corporatization of the WWE and the making of it as a public company where it's accountable to shareholders and it's accountable to people other than the McMahons and their own personal whims, is that it has gotten a lot more progressive politically. I mean, it still has the old wrestling standbys. I mean, Damien Sandow is still a heel with the gimmick that he's a smart guy. You know, smart guys are bad guys in wrestling. But with Darren Young coming out as gay and him receiving complete unequivocal support from the company, and I agree with you, I think it is publicity. I think the whole TMZ thing was work, just a way of setting it up so that he could come out without having to do it on WWE TV, but do it in a way that would get media and would get press. And I don't believe for a second that there just happened to be a TMZ cameraman loitering at the airport when this mid-card wrestler came walking off the plane, and he was like, oh, hey, what do you think about same-sex issues, and what do you think about gay issues in wrestling? And he just happened to be talking to a closeted wrestler who was ready to come out at that particular moment. I mean, I'm sure it was all a work. It was all for publicity, but it's good. I'm glad that they did it. I'm glad that Darren came out. I'm glad he was able to, and I'm glad that the company is supporting. I think it's an absolute, completely positive thing. There are some fans, I'm sure, that will have a problem with it. There are a lot of wrestling fans who are still, holdovers from the good old boy days when wrestling was more southern and more, macho men wrestled, and it was very homophobic. There's still a lot of that. That's not gone by any means. But one of the nice things about modern WWE is that it doesn't pander to those fans nearly as much as it used to, and that's good. That's a good thing. That's a progressive thing, and it's something that you can sort of hope that eventually, very soon, I'll be able to take that off the list of things, reasons to feel guilty about being a wrestling fan. Eventually, hopefully very soon, I'll be able to check homophobia off that list because it's moving in a very, very positive direction in that sense. Jacoby Nimble, hi Steve, I love your videos. Sorry to ask this again, but I was wondering what you thought about whistleblowers like Bradley Manning and Edward Snowden and the information that they revealed. Let me know if you don't have anything to say, and I'll stop asking. Thanks. No need to apologize for asking a question more than once. I've said before, if you have a question you really want to hear me say something about and you ask it once and I don't answer it, if you really want to hear what I have to say about it, please feel free to ask it as many times as you want until I either answer it or you just get bored with asking. That's not a problem at all. As for the whistleblowers, Bradley Manning and Edward Snowden and things like that, I mean, I don't really have anything terribly interesting to say about it, which is the main reason why I haven't answered the question to this point. But I will say that there are two things I notice. First, the world does not come to an end when they leak their information. None of these whistleblowers have leaked information that is so colossally, catastrophically shocking or dangerous to national security or whatever that our democracy has collapsed as a result. Ultimately, after some time passes, it turns out to really not be that big of a deal, and so that maybe that argues for not treating people like this so harshly. I mean, certainly I can understand the government wanting to maintain control of its information and the flow of information and not wanting to have a situation where anybody with access to top secret information can just feel free to go and leak it to the media or WikiLeaks or whatever. I understand why they want to control that themselves, and they want things like classification and top secret to mean something. But at the same time, when something does get out that the government doesn't want to get out, usually it turns out to not be that big of a deal. So that's one thing. The other thing is the fact that people like Snowden and Manning felt the need to go public with this secret information, felt the need to reveal these things that the government was keeping from the public. To me, is that's something that happens when an agency of the state or of the nation, if you prefer, doesn't live up to the ideals of the nation. These guys, Manning and Snowden, saw, if we assume that their motives were pure, saw the government, saw the military, etc., acting in a way that they felt was not worthy of the United States, that they were doing things that the public didn't know about, that the public should know about, that the government was doing that it should not have been doing, or at least should not have been doing in secret, and they acted against that. I think the whistleblowers are what happen when the organization is not doing what it's supposed to do, and I think that is worth considering. Claude Dragoons, dear Steve, in your opinion, which of Thomas Aquinas' 5 proofs is the most idiotic? Which is the least idiotic? And finally, bonus question, look at the image Wikipedia has for Thomas Aquinas on the page for his 5 proofs. Is it just me, or does he look a bit like he's fingering that book? Feel free to cut out that last part if you don't want to answer it. No, I'm not going to cut out the fingering question. Are you fucking kidding me? Let me take a look at that picture of Aquinas that you're talking about and see if I can see what you mean. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Which of the 5 proofs do I think is the most idiotic? In hindsight, the teleological argument, because now we can see that there are good natural explanations for why the universe operates the way it does that there doesn't need to be a designer that made the universe as it is. Although most of the science on that has been done since Aquinas' era, so maybe the argument from degree, the argument from degree. That's where Aquinas says that since certain things are nobler or truer or more beautiful or more just or whatever than certain other things, we can reason from that there must be something that is as good or as pure or as noble or as righteous as anything can possibly be, and that thing must be God. I just think that's fatuous reasoning. I don't. It doesn't make sense to me. Just because we can make judgments that one thing is superior to another thing in a given subjective category, that doesn't mean that there is some ultimate expression of that category, some ultimate example of goodness that is as good as it can possibly be. It just doesn't follow. It's an unwarranted assumption. The concepts of good and bad and just and unjust and beautiful and noble are all human constructs that we apply to what we experience in order to make sense of it and to make judgments. So it's not an argument for the existence of God or anything really other than human judgment. And the most convincing, or the least idiotic, I like the way you put that. The first three, as Richard Dawkins has written, the first three of the five are really all versions of the cosmological argument. The prime mover, the first cause, and the contingency argument, which basically means everything had to come from somewhere. There must be something that has to exist in order for other things to be able to exist or not exist, because everything could not have come from nothing. It's all basically the cosmological argument. That probably is the least idiotic, but it still doesn't mean that it's a very good argument for God. It's just not. Nero Byrne, many atheists say, I just want some evidence for God. So I wonder, what would you consider evidence for God? I don't mean proof like he manifests on Oprah. What would be something that would qualify as evidence for God in your eyes? I mentioned something similar to this in one of the videos in the An Atheist Read series that I'm doing right now, the one about evidence that demands a verdict. When Josh McDowell, the author of that book, is talking about the Bible, and I proposed that if God really wanted us to think of the Bible as a book apart from other books, that there was something divine and supernatural about it, it's very easy to imagine how an omnipotent God could have done that. He could have created a book that was impossible to translate, contrary to his intended meaning. He could have made a book that was impossible for people to read incorrectly from it. Like you would look at a passage from the Bible and you would attempt to misquote it, and you would find yourself unable to do it. Something like that. Something that had what appeared to be an obvious supernatural element that could not be accounted for by it just being a normal book. Something like that. Now, that would not necessarily prove that it had anything to do with God. It would just be a book with some very, very unusual, unique properties that had to be accounted for. But it's more than we have now. And if you wanted to convince people that the Bible was the Word of God and it was unique among all books, that would be one way God, if he was real and wanted to do that, could have done that. That's just a suggestion. There are other possibilities. Having Jesus still be around would be another one. You know, instead of having Jesus live a normal life and die and come back and then go up to heaven, conveniently leaving no evidence behind, have Jesus stick around after the resurrection. Have him still be here to prove himself, to continue to use miracles and his divine presence to confirm this for future generations. That would be something. Again, something that didn't happen. And again, not necessarily proof that he had anything to do with God. He could just be some extraordinarily long-lived, powerful person that doesn't have a connection to a God, but highly suggestive. Much better evidence than what we are supposedly left with, according to Christians today. Reese Moffat, question, what do you think the USA would be like if it hadn't gained independence from Britain? I don't know. It's hard to imagine an alternate history like that and see it as anything other than completely imaginary. I guess slavery would have ended sooner and less violently. Today we maybe would have fewer guns, less crime, nicer people. We'd be more like Canada, in other words, which, I mean, from where I'm sitting, wouldn't be absolutely a terrible thing. Thunder. Which traditionally follows lightning, which means that it is now time for
the lightning round. Rapid fire questions, glib and adequate answers.
One Key Kai. Have you ever sharted while not wearing underwear? What did you do? Yeah, I came up with the dumbest question I could think of. Well done. I have never sharted while not wearing underwear. I always wear underwear. Didn't your mother ever teach you to wear clean underwear at all times, just in case something happened? So no, I didn't do it. But if I had, my first thing would have been to go home and change into some fucking clean underwear. What, are you kidding me? Bagser 1. Hey Steve, TNA Wrestling is running a house show in Hagerstown soon. Will you go out to see it? Probably not. They ran a show here last year too, and I didn't go to see that one. I'm probably not going to go. Lax Paint. Steve, what phone device games do you play when you want to kill 20 minutes? I have crossword puzzles on my Kindle here. I have Free Cell that I play a lot, and I also have the Simpsons tablet game, Tapped Out. I usually just fuck around on that. Jaybird196. Steve, do you think a good plot point for an episode of one of the modern Sherlock Holmes series could involve Holmes's coke habit? Yeah, sure. That's a part of the character. I think they could talk about that in a future episode of Sherlock with Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman. In fact, maybe they could even reenact the famous scene from Saved by the Bell where Zach discovers that Jesse is doing drugs. Although, of course, with Martin Freeman playing Watson, I mean, maybe it would be more like, Holmes, are you doing drugs? Something like that. I don't know. That's my Martin Freeman impression. You're welcome. You get that for free. Adderall Apocalypse. Oh, hey, speaking of Holmes, what did you think of House and the kind of homages it paid to the Sherlock Holmes character stories? I really liked House a lot. I thought Hugh Laurie was excellent. I thought that Robert Sean Leonard was great as Wilson. And if somebody doesn't someday do a version of Sherlock Holmes and Watson with Hugh Laurie playing Holmes and Robert Sean Leonard playing Watson, they're just leaving money on the table. Somebody make that happen. I don't care if it's a fucking Hallmark fucking TV movie. Somebody make that happen. Robert Sean Leonard and Hugh Laurie as Watson and Holmes. It must be done. Zozan and KeyPayX. Hey Steve, how do you pick which comments to feature? It all depends on if the question is interesting and if I have an interesting answer for it. So I'm not sure why I picked yours. I'm horny dad, come inside. Since when was the last time you cried? Well, the last time was when I first saw your username and I cried with pride for humanity. Farnium, attention Steve, what is the difference between a goblin and a hobgoblin? Well, I actually looked this up, and apparently the difference is that goblins are mostly malevolent creatures, while hobgoblins, while being mischievous and not altogether good and pure, are usually more friendly and are employed as like house servants. That's the best I could come up with. I don't know, like I guess maybe Dobby from Harry Potter would be considered a hobgoblin. Why the fuck? Who fucking cares? What's the difference between a leprechaun and a pixie? Who fucking cares? The difference between nothing and nothing. I'm sorry. I don't know where that came from. Damon Capdrix, you have the nerdiest bookshelf. Which DC Comics and D&D books are those? I can't read most of the titles. There are no D&D books. I do not own any D&D books. I do not play Dungeons and Dragons because I am not that much of a fucking loser nerd. But it's mostly DC Comics. There's some Batman and Superman stuff. Some Shazam as well. And then underneath, which you can't really see, there's a bunch more. And it's mostly DC stuff. Batman and Superman mostly. The Big Baird. Steve, is cheesecake a cake or is it pie? I say pie. Well, I think you are correct. It's a crust, it's a filling, it's not a cake, it's a fucking pie. But would you really want to eat something called cheese pie? I don't think so. Whoever named cheesecake was very wise indeed. Hey, that is it for the questions this week. Before I get out of here, I want to give a shout out, of course. The shout out this week goes to Cheeky Vimto 08, a long overdue, much deserved shout out. Cheeky Vimto makes great atheist videos. He argues against creationism, usually from a more philosophical perspective. He takes on William Lane Craig. He takes on Alvin Plantinga. He makes some really interesting, awesome videos that are a great resource for you if you are interested in countering creationist arguments or Christian apologetic arguments. He has a 3-part series on the free will defense of God. Actually, the first 2 parts are kind of preamble, and then the third bit is where he really takes down the free will defense of God. It's a really, really good channel, and you should definitely check it out. If you like my stuff, you should give a look to Cheeky Vimto 08 because I think it's great, and I think you should give it a chance and give it a subscription if you like it. So that's it for this week. I will be back next week to do this all over again, although with different questions, of course. But before that happens, you have to ask. So please leave a comment on this video. Ask me a question about anything you want to know, something about me, something you want to know my opinion on, something you want to hear me talk about. It really doesn't matter. There is no subject too serious. There is no subject too frivolous and stupid. I will talk about anything that I have something to say about. So leave a comment on this video. Ask me your question for next time, and next time I will answer as many of them as I possibly feel like possibly can. So until then, have a good week, take care, and I will see you guys next time.